So just for some background, I guess. So I originally I shot you a response on a Reddit comment, because sometimes I get linked to Kotaku threads, and I saw that you said that you felt like I intentionally misrepresent the Hispanic immigration thing, and I was curious why you think that, so here we are.
Well, in part just because I think that, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think anyway that you've seen some research that contradicts some of the things that you seem to say about the immigration, but I mean, regardless of whether or not you were intentionally being misleading or not, obviously I disagree with your take on it.
Oh, well, because that was kind of the center point of your comment. Because you were making a comment about people that I wanted deplatformed, and one of those were people that were grossly negligent or intentionally dishonest, and you said that you felt like I was intentionally dishonest in the arguments I was making. So I was curious if you had a reason why you thought that, or if you were just spouting random shit.
For instance, I think that I'm sure you've been to the website, The Alternative Hypothesis, a fair number of times.
Yeah.
And you know that on that website, or maybe you don't know this, but I assume you would know anyway, that on that website, for instance, there's an analysis that breaks down the fiscal impact of different ethnic groups in the United States.
Okay, what about it?
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, what about it?
That it shows that Hispanics have a fairly strong negative impact fiscally on the United States. And then in spite of this, that you say things like that Hispanics do not have a negative fiscal impact.
Do you understand the difference between a fiscal impact and an economic impact?
Yeah, where a fiscal impact would be referring, I suppose, specifically to the net effect of government spending, whereas an economic impact would account for sort of everything that takes place in the economy.
Sure. So my specific statements in the past have been pretty rigorously consistent here, where I've said that immigration either has a slightly negative or a net wash impact on fiscal budgets and an overall positive impact on the economy. I don't think I've ever said that immigrants have a positive impact fiscally on the country. I don't know if anybody has ever stated that. I get most of this immigration information from Borges, and he seems to think that it's about a wash or maybe slightly negative, but nobody's ever said the economic impact is negative. I'm not too concerned about only looking at a fiscal impact of something. That's a whole other different thing.
Well, I think that whether or not talking about the economic impact being positive or negative is perhaps limited in its informativeness, in that not all sort of economic activity is good. Look at the estimates that you derive from Borges's work in terms of the addition to income that natives would have as the result of Hispanic immigrants. That's far lesser than the amount of than the net negative fiscal impact of Hispanic immigrants, right? So that if they add people's average income by $100, but on average they consume on net more than $100 of government services, then it would seem, technically true, but in connotation misleading to call that a positive economic impact.
I'm not familiar. I've never heard the idea that every dollar earned by a Hispanic in the United States is spent by government. I've never been made aware of that impact before. And it sounds to me like...
No, that's not what I'm saying. It's just that, right, so they consume a certain number of government services, and then they also pay a certain number of taxes. And so thereby we have a net level of government consumption. We have consumption minus their taxes.
So, because I'm just...
amount of money...
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Do you have like an actual breakdown of this data, or is this just conjecture from you?
No, the data's been broken down like that before.
So you have data that shows that a fiscal impact is overwhelmingly affecting the economy such that the economic gains are offset by that fiscal impact? I would very much like to see a source on that if you have that, and not just an all hypothesis article, like something from like a vetted economist.
I can do it without the all type.
Because I've never in my life seen this before, and I've got like 50 different like studies that all point to positive impacts economically from immigration. That seems to be like the economic consensus. Like it's not even like a debated topic.
Okay, so it's a little tricky to do just because like the push to talk thing. It's a little tricky to move around.
Yeah, no problem. You can shoot it to me in like a Discord DM or something, but
sure. But a little bit like, so there's for one thing, there's an analysis by the Heritage Foundation called, like I can link it to you, but
yeah,
the fiscal cost of unlawful immigrants and amnesty to the U.S. taxpayer.
Okay.
And then even when looking at lawful immigrants, right, it finds that the fiscal deficit per household, $4,000 $344.
Okay,
Now,
but that says only fiscally. We're talking about economic impact as well, right?
But if you turn to Borjas's data, where he has a calculation of the amount of economic activity added to the economy by Hispanics, by immigrants, Hispanic immigrants. If you look at that and you subtract from that the amount of that is just the consumption of goods directly by Hispanics, so you look at the amount that they add to native income and you divide it by the number of natives, so that the number you get there is significantly less than $4,000, suggesting that the amount of income by Hispanic immigration is much lesser than is the debt caused by Hispanic immigrants.
Yeah, so I'm not even sure if these two numbers are directly comparable. Do you have like an economist that breaks down and makes this argument that the fiscal drain of immigration is greater than the economic benefit? You mentioned the Heritage study, but that's only talking about fiscal impacts, which I probably wouldn't disagree with, but that's not what we're here for.
Yes, well, like I said, the calculation of their effect on the incomes of natives.
What you're taking like the fiscal impact, which is calculated some way, and then you're trying to do some additive, subtractive thing. I'm not sure if these two numbers can even be directly compared. So I'm wondering if you have an actual economist that's done these breakdowns before, rather than just like, these are two numbers I took, and I'm just going to subtract one from the other and then make my claim. These are really complicated economic transactions.
Off the top of my head, I'm not sure if an economist has made this specific comparison.
Okay.
But
it seems strange to me that every economist that I've come across seems to say that immigration is like a massive boon to the economy, but somehow you figured out these two numbers don't add up, I guess, unless you're doing like PhD work in this area or something.
No, the economists are technically right? Because the way economists look at economic activity is by measuring various, basically spending measures, right? GDP, this sort of thing. So that, like, welfare spending is counted as, in this sense, a positive economic activity because it's spending, right? That's part of GDP. So the economists, like, the view on this is definitely correct using that notion. I want to call positive, and it's positive in the sense of like a positive number, right? It's not positive in the sense of a good thing, and it can be good or bad depending on what it's being spent on. There are so like two things. I guess I'm making a comparison here, which I can't cite anyone with a PhD doing. But do you at least see how intuitively, maybe to like us, I don't know, foolish lay people or something, it would make sense though to say that if, and I'm looking at it now, that if the like Borjas numbers suggest that immigrants add per person dollars of income a year, but immigrant households on average are consuming on net $4,000 of government services per year, even though all that is counted as positive in terms of how economists account for economic activity. We normally think about what's good and bad for the economy, that on net that's going to be bad, at least for natives.
So I acknowledge the first thing you said, that I'm a layperson. That's why I would never take two numbers from two totally unrelated analyses and go, look, this one's bigger than this one, therefore here is a massive conclusion that has far-reaching implications across the entire economy. I would never make that assessment. I wouldn't trust myself to do it. Firstly, I'm not even sure if welfare spending is taken into account when they look at economic impact by immigrants, and then I'm also not sure if exactly your numbers are taking into account. Like, this is something that I would need to see done, like borne out like in an actual comparative study, where I know that people are controlling for all the facts and figures, and there isn't like any weird shit going on. Like, I wouldn't just take like, well, here's one study that says that immigrants contribute this much, and then here's another one, and if I divide this by all the number of households and then do the adding and subtracting, I can see that there's a negative number. Like, that doesn't sound like a good analysis to me.
In the sense, you can even break it down by households. Again, with the Borjas numbers, that immigrants add to like the native households $2,171 per year, but those same households have to pay in taxes over $4,000 a year in the long run, because obviously we can put it in debt temporarily. But in the long run, have to pay $4,000. I don't see why that would be a particularly, I guess, suspect comparison to make.
If you don't, there's nothing I can do to convince you otherwise. Economics is insanely fucking complicated, and economic transactions like immigration and impact on wages and labor and usage of fiscal benefits from the state, like all of this stuff is really, really, really complicated. So if I tell you that you can't take two numbers from two totally different studies and then just compare them and go, look, here's my massive far-reaching conclusion. If you don't see why that might be like a really naive way to compare data,
I think it's a good reason for us to like think about it.
It has been thought about. But like, this is the thing. You're trying to present me this data like, hey, by the way, as a layperson, I discovered these two numbers that you can subtract from one another, and no economist whatsoever has ever thought about this in the history of all of comparing whether or not.
Let's make a distinction between me not being able to name an economist off the top of my head that made this specific comparison and like the positive statement, no economist has ever done that, right? Like I have no idea. That's those are two very different things.
We can hit up like I don't want to use my own research because it might be biased, but like we can go to the economics subreddit on Reddit and we can look at the site. I'm sure they've got a ton of shit about like immigration and impact on the economy. And I'm willing to bet that everything they say there is positive, unless you think that's like a left-leaning subreddit or something. This is just something that I'm not familiar with before, and I've done like a decent amount of reading. So when I do like a decent amount of research and all the economic consensus seems to hone in on like one certain thing, and then you come and you tell me, well, look, I've got two totally unrelated studies, and I think if I do a little bit of alchemy, I can show you that this is actually bad, and all those economists who have dedicated their lives to doing this research is wrong. Like I'm not going to believe you there. Do you understand?
I'm not saying that their research is wrong. Right.
Well, you're saying something like, well, what they don't actually...
Like from an accounting standpoint, it's a positive impact.
Okay, but I don't even know if GDP, because GDP counts as a transfer payment, I don't even know if that's considered in like the net impact of immigration to the economy. Like what you're saying, it just seems like it's like when people talk about like complex stats, like, well, what about this one thing? Like maybe the economist didn't realize that all the benefit is actually just from welfare. Like that sounds like something like a grade school student would propose. Like the teacher would be like, what are some possible issues with our data? And then like a kid would, well, what if all the GDP generated was just from welfare? And the teacher would go, oh, well, that's good. However, researchers aren't totally fucking stupid, so they would obviously account for something like this. Like, that would be my guess. I could be wrong, but the fact that you have nothing to give me but conjecture doesn't help your case. Do you think that's a fair argument? Or
from the economist perspective, I guess I don't even see why this isn't the sort of thing they really normally at least would account for, because economists normally aren't interested in the net benefit, like in this connotative sense. Like the economics is primarily looking at things through an accounting sort of lens. Like I'm not saying that the economists are dumb, right? It's we politically think about sort of positive economic activity is distinct from positive economic activity in an accounting sense, which is normally how economists are looking at this.
Okay, I feel like economists would account for this. This seems like a massive thing. So because I've never heard of this argument before, so I'm just like reading an Investopedia article. Investopedia usually has pretty good information. If you think this is wrong, feel free to shoot me something differently. So I'm reading this, and it says, transfer payments. For the purposes of calculating GDP, government spending does not include transfer payments, the reallocation of money from one party to another, which includes Social Security, Medicare, unemployment insurance, welfare programs, and subsidies. Because these are not payments for goods or services, they do not represent a form of final demand or GDP.
So that covers some government services, right? But obviously not all government services.
So what are these massive government services that are being lumped in with GDP that aren't included in transfer payments?
So I think that would all... I'd have to listen to the listing of it. I think those were all basically means-tested sort of benefits. One of the biggest ones, right, is just school, use of infrastructure, that sort of thing.
Okay, schools are paid for with real estate taxes. I don't understand what the comparison being drawn is here. Or do you think there's a lot of like homeless immigrants that go to school, or?
No, that immigrants go to school and then taxes pay for that, so that's part of their consumption of government services, right?
Well, I guess, but I mean, they have to pay for those taxes, no?
The immigrants. I'm not sure what you mean. Like immigrants have to pay for all of the immigrant accounting of the consumption of schooling.
Well, where do taxes for schools come from?
From the people that pay taxes.
Oh, well, do you know which ones?
Which, like, the specific people? No.
Okay, so generally, school taxes are calculated by real estate tax. This is why if you go to wealthy neighborhoods and you go to the schools around the wealthy neighborhoods, their schools are really nice. If you go to shitty neighborhoods, their schools
but what
are
does
really
that have to do with immigrants. Though?
Because you're
I
making
thought
it
you meant like somehow that it was just immigrants that were paying the
well,
taxes.
you're making it sound like immigrants are going to all these schools that are being paid for by other people. But if you're renting property or real estate in some area, you're paying taxes that go to the school. So I don't see how that counts as a negative consumption of some public good that they're not paying for.
Well, you have to. It doesn't necessarily, right? You have to compare the cost of the schooling to the actual amount of taxes paid by the individuals.
Okay. I just don't understand how that comes out to be negative. Like, you live in a district, you pay taxes in that district, and then it goes to the school. If you live in a shitty district, you probably have a shitty school. It's not like Hispanic immigrants are going to like these super wealthy, like Harvard-esque high schools or something.
That's somewhat of a separate issue, but the spending differences by ethnicity are pretty small in terms of the.
Okay, but like
school.
ethnicities are going to be segregated into, like, for instance, you can't just compare what do white people pay for public school versus Hispanics pay for public schools, because white people go to better public schools than Hispanic people go to, and those public schools spend more money than the Hispanic public schools. That's what I'm saying. So you can't just compare it like that. Like, for instance, Hispanics might pay 50% of what white people pay in taxes to schools, but they might consume 50% less services because their schools don't spend as much money.
There are two things. So one, I don't think it's true that there's much of a difference in terms of the spending on like white and Hispanic and black schools and that sort of thing.
That's great. That's because we can look that up right now if you want. So you're telling me that if I go to any city and I go to a poor neighborhood versus a rich neighborhood, do you think that the budgets of these two schools are going to be similar?
I'm saying that if you look at the total spending on the education of Hispanics, blacks, and whites, you segregate it out categorization scheme, and there's not much of a difference.
I'm sorry to do this to you.
Poor and rich people, while those that categorization scheme is correlated to socioeconomic status, those are two separate questions.
Okay, so I'm not trying to call you out, and I'm looking for this right now. Do you have like a source on like the total spending on education by race? Is that like a thing that is documented somewhere?
Yes, I can. Yes, it is. I didn't just make it up, and this is not in me interpreting.
Yeah, but can you throw me that link in a DM? I'm curious.
Yeah, 1 second. That might take me a minute to find, but I can definitely send it.
Yeah, that's fine. So somebody's shooting me like a .ed or www.ed.gov link. So this is government data. If you believe in the deep state, maybe you don't believe in this. So this is apparently 40% of high schools don't offer physics, 25% don't offer chemistry. More than half of all high schools with large numbers of African Americans or Latinos don't offer calculus. Now, I could be wrong. I'm digging through the PDF, but a statement like that seems to imply that there's different levels of education or qualities of education offered to people based on race, which probably has to do with them living in poor neighborhoods, so they go to shittier schools. That's my guess. It's a conjecture. I'm digging through this PDF to try to find out, but...
Well, there are definitely differences in the sort of classes offered in schools by ethnicity, but that doesn't mean that it's the result of differences in spending, right? That could just be a result of the differences in the kinds of students at those places.
Well, sure, but if you're offering way more classes in one school than another, you have to fund the classes. Well,
it's not necessarily that they're offering more classes, right?
So you think in schools where they offer high-level calc, they just don't teach algebra anymore?
Well, no, but I'm saying, imagine one school might, all their students have to take algebra, so say they have 4 classes in algebra, and then another class has 3 classes in algebra and 1 class in calculus.
And you don't think having 2 different types of curriculum or teachers that can teach multiple types of curriculum, that wouldn't cost more money?
At the high school level? In terms of, do you mean hiring a teacher that can teach calculus is going to cost more than hiring one that can teach pre-calculus? I don't think so.
Pre-calc and algebra? It's 2 totally different curriculums. You're doubling the workload on a teacher. Teachers have jobs. If you have to teach 4 classes of algebra, that's going to be easier than 1 class of algebra, 1 class of calc, 1 class of trig. That's more work. It's 2 different classes to double your curriculum load. Like, okay, so I don't know exactly what's happening here, and this is a total bullshit guess on my end, but it kind of sounds like you read an article by the Alt Hypothesis talking about the genetic inferiority of Hispanics, and you were real keen, because you don't like brown people for whatever reason, so you found an article that says, like, Hispanics eat up all the fucking fiscal shit, but you don't really understand any of the underlying shit, which is fine. I don't even care about any of that. Like, the thing that irks me is that you were, like, really adamant in your post that I argue in bad faith, but it's really clear that you have no fucking idea what you're talking about. You can't call out a single thing that I've said that you feel has been done in bad faith or me not knowing it. Like, I understand that you're a Kotaku in Action poster, but like, wow, that's like really frustrating.
Well, no, I mean, I understand you don't like the comparison I made.
It's not about the comparison. It's that you don't really know what you're talking about. And like, quoting your own words, I find it amusing that by his own standards, he should have been deplatformed from Twitter. Destiny tends to lie about stuff a lot, especially by omission or willful ignorance, such as fiscal impact of U.S. Hispanics. Like, you were really strong in these statements. Contrary to what Destiny says, he cares.
I think it's a very clear comparison you can actually make, right? I don't think that just saying, well, we're not autonomous, we don't understand the numbers.
You don't. It's not even that you lack the education. You lack the insight to know how stupid you're being. It's called Dunning-Kruger. Like, you think that you can take the fiscal impact from some study and then extrapolate it to all households and subtract it by some arbitrary measure of economic gain and go, well, look, I've proven that this thing that is believed by most mainstream economists is wrong. That's like such an incredibly stupid statement that you yourself would have to be beyond stupid to actually say that without realizing how dumb you sound, but you're not even capable of perceiving it. But like, you'll say something like that and then also post about how stupid I am and that I'm willfully ignorant on topics. Like, that blows my fucking mind.
Yeah, I mean, again, it is very. I think this is like incredibly straightforward. And,
yeah, I know you do, but that's because you're stupid. Well, I mean, like, surely you understand that. Like, I mean, I can explain it for you if you want.
That if your house has to lose this much money in a year because of a given group, but gets this much money, find those numbers to see the net effect. This is not like magic.
Okay, so like, here's an example. Do you think that trade deficits hurt the economy? We're running a massive trade deficit. Which, why not? We're sending them more money than they send us. How does that not hurt the economy?
Because we get like goods. Like, in that sense, I have a trade deficit with like, that's like I buy things.
Okay. What about when immigrants come over and then they get paid and then they engage in something called remittance where they send the money back to their home country? Does that hurt our economy?
I mean, that might hurt in the short run, maybe when they first show up. I mean, in the long run, it doesn't, because the economy adjusts to like the difference in the sort of amount of money floating around.
Kind of, sure, but we're also getting something for that too, right? We're paying for labor, which should mean cheaper goods. Which should
obviously they're providing some sort of labor.
Okay, yeah. So when you have some number in mind for fiscal impact of an immigrant, which I don't even know what exactly that number is measuring and what services that's taking into account and how those numbers are measured. So I'm not even sure where you're getting those numbers from. And then you say, like, well, if we just compare that fiscal impact number to another number that was never meant to be compared to fiscal impact, right? Some other number that might measure the economic impact of an immigrant, which might already take into account some types of fiscal impact. I don't know, right? Because you're taking two completely unrelated studies, and then you say, well, look, now I've proven that not only have I proven that Hispanics are a detriment to the economy, I've proven that you're arguing in bad faith. Like, this is a totally ridiculous position to take. Like, why don't we just collect all the data from the economy and then just compare every number to see what's better or what's worse? Like, these are incredibly complicated comparisons. These numbers are gathered in like an incredibly meticulous way.
Sure, like, economic data is carefully gathered, but that it doesn't speak to, like, doesn't change what it is, right? Like, again, I mean, I don't know what to say. You think it's a very complicated idea that we can compare the amount of money your house has to lose in gains, and I don't. You just combine them, and you have the net effect.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess, like, if I were you in your position, I mean, it's a lot of fucking work, but you should publish a paper on this because you literally have like the groundbreaking answer that no economist seems to know, that immigrants are actually bad for the economy. And then make sure that you cite in your paper that you compared two numbers from two different things. It'll probably be a paragraph long, and then like everybody will see that you're totally right, I guess. And then all the research that dumb fucks like me do, I guess, are like totally wasted because you figured out like the key. I don't know what else you would expect to come from that kind of a thing. Like, do you understand why I might think it's ridiculous? Do you think that I'm being unfair? To think that you, a layman, and I'm a...
I mean, I think what you're doing is you're making this out to be more complicated than it actually is, when the logic is fairly clear.
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Why is it that no economist comments on this ever? Or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say no economist. Why is it that all of mainstream economics seems to have missed this comparison of two numbers, but you caught it? Or you read somebody that caught it, no one talks about it?
Again, I don't even know that they have missed the comparison. And then even if they had, I've already told you that I think it's because the way that economists tend to account just isn't looking at it in these terms.
Do you really think that economists only look at the economy in terms of GDP? That's it? They never think of like any other type of, maybe a purchasing power index or purchasing parity or whatever, or any other type of metrics, unemployment? There's no other ways that people measure like how
obviously there are other ways. I mean, you can talk about unemployment as well. It's the same sort of thing, right? That if immigrants in an area, and I don't know that this is true, but this is just like an example for how this could go with other metrics as well, right? If immigration decreases unemployment, and part of that is because the government has to hire more people to work in welfare bureaucracies, well, but that would be counted as positive the way economists normally account for this sort of thing, right? In an accounting sense, it is positive.
And you don't think that any economist might note that even though a large number of jobs were created, the majority of them went to the...
What all economists do or do not
what?
think. I'm just telling you that this is an argument that makes sense to me. This is how it goes.
Yeah, but you're doing this like you're arguing like what you feel is right, and like I did a fuck ton of research on that. Yeah, it is. You're saying that like you just said that. You just said this makes sense to me. Like, okay, well, I'm asking why is it that in all of my research, unless you think I am engaging in a hardcore motivated reaning, and you're free to tear through my outline with Fuentes if you want, like I couldn't find anybody that's saying any of the stuff you're saying. It seems to have eluded all of the researchers. So I'm just wondering why, and you think it's because...
I don't have any hypothesis as to why your particular look at the research didn't lead to the same things as mine did. That's like I don't know. But like it's, and like even if I'm wrong, what I'm saying is that this seems logical to me, right? Like we wouldn't say if someone in a class on logic made an incorrect deduction or something like that, we wouldn't say that it's like just they feel it's right or something. It seemingly makes sense.
Well, no. I mean, we would test the premises of your logic, right? That you right now you formed a valid argument because you've logically shown you've connected two premises together to make a conclusion. But now we would have to check the soundness of your premises, right? Like, can these two numbers be compared? For example, like people that roid or have like more testosterone or whatever, might have bigger muscles or something. So logically, if you eat a bunch of testosterone, you should grow bigger muscles, right? That's a valid statement, right? I've got two premises, and it seems like they lead to a valid conclusion, but that doesn't mean that's how it's going to play out in reality.
Yes, I understand that you can be misled by the deduction. My point is just that when I say that this seems to make sense to me, it's seemingly to me way different than your characterization of it, just like because this is how I feel.
Okay, I guess like when you present to me some things that seem to be agreed upon by most economists, and you give me a differing point of view, but you don't have anything like...
Well, yeah, I don't see that it's agreed upon by most economists. I have not... Because so far I know, we've both agreed that we haven't, out the top of our heads, we don't know of any economists who have addressed this specific thing. And so therefore...
I mean, tons of economists have addressed this specific thing. Like, tons of people.
Just this thing whereby we look at the net impact of immigration on the economy after we take out all of the effect of government spending, and we're looking at the effect not on the economy as a whole, because that includes literally just stuff going to the immigrants, but specifically the effect on natives. I mean, if you have an economist who did the analysis, that I mean, it's a bit like, why didn't you just say that at the beginning, and then we can compare that to the numbers I have? But my impression was that neither of us knew of an economist that did that.
Here, well, I mentioned Borjas by name. It is the main one that I looked at because he's the one that's usually cited by anti-immigration people, so I figured he'd be the harshest. But I threw you the Google talk. If you go down to part 6, you can dig through my sources if you feel like there's been so much research on this. If you feel like I've misrepresented something here, some of my sources are bad here, I mean... I couldn't find anything that says what you're saying. Like, when I go online and I do debates, I know that there are going to be people like you that are in subreddits that are like clawing at the chance to like make sure that everything I say is wrong. And it's really frustrating because I spend a lot of fucking time doing this fucking research, which is really boring to me. I hate research. This is why I play fucking video games, and this is why I sucked at school. So like, when I do the work to do this, and then somebody like you shows up and says that I'm lying about everything, but you can't even point out like a single thing I'm wrong about. You just say like, oh, well, he's dishonest. And then when I bring you on to ask you about it, you kind of like spin me a hypothesis with no backing whatsoever besides two unrelated numbers. I don't know. That's a little bit frustrating to me.
This is a bizarre idea that the amount of money that your household has to pay is unrelated to the amount of money that your household receives. Like, that's what the two numbers are. They're not like, maybe there's some reason in the accounting of the numbers for which they're not actually. Well,
sure, but I'm not doubting just those.
They're not unrelated. Like, they're obviously related.
If you're just talking about fiscal impact, I don't necessarily disagree with you.
No, I'm not. It's not just fiscal impact. Again, like, I'm comparing the negative fiscal impact to the positive total economic impact on natives.
Okay, where can you show me where these two numbers are being compared then, or where you got these two numbers from? I'm just curious. So you're taking this number. The standard textbook model of a competitive labor market yields an estimate of the immigration surplus equal to $35 billion a year. You're taking that number?
Yes.
So I guess firstly, I don't know. Maybe I'm just a huge cuck. I wouldn't be comfortable just ripping that one number from here and then pitting that against like average household shit. Man, that just seems like a real bad idea. I could pull a couple economists in chat tomorrow if you want to talk early about it. I don't know. I would have to ask them about it, but I feel like if I were to do that on stream, I feel like they would grill the fuck out of me for doing that. Firstly. Secondly, looking at this table, it doesn't really look like lawful immigrant households consume that much more than non-immigrant households when I look at these comparisons. Like, if I look at the table 6 you linked me, for instance, households headed by persons without a high school degree, non-immigrants have a deficit of 36,000, lawful immigrants have a deficit of 36,990.
Well, but immigrant and non-immigrant households don't have the same educational attainment, right? The actual difference just in total is that immigrants and households negative 4,000, whereas for home it's, I think, $300.
Sure. Yeah, if you're comparing everything, I'm just comparing across like income brackets. Like, it doesn't really seem like lawful immigrants really consume.
Well, that's surely true. That if you like start controlling for socioeconomic status, the differences between immigrants and natives in terms of their net consumption of government services are going to be dramatically reduced.
Well, then it sounds like your problem isn't with immigrants; it's how we do like welfare and whatnot and collect taxes. No.
I mean, the point. I'm not sure exactly what you mean, right?
The point here isn't that immigrants are the problem. The point is that poor people are the problem. If your whole comparison disappears when you control for socioeconomic status, then your problem isn't with immigrants. Your problem is with poor people.
I mean, the problem, the reason why, in my view, which obviously you disagree with, but they have net on natives is not because they country. It's because of the characteristics of the people from other countries that happen to be coming to the United States right now. With poverty, specifically.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
They're like, yeah, it's not inherent to them, like, being an immigrant. It's not just because they weren't born in the United States. It's because of specific features about specific immigrants.
What do you mean by that?
Socioeconomic status, that the immigrants being poor consume way more government services than they pay in taxes.
So maybe we should
less in taxes you have to pay.
So then wouldn't the argument there mean that we need to modify the government services?
I mean, I would not be against changing the way welfare is done. Sure.
I guess it's just like when you present me this data initially, like it seemed like your point was that immigrants consume way more welfare or have a negative impact on the economy compared to non-immigrants. But that's not really the issue. It's that poor people have a negative impact on the economy versus rich people. That seems to be more the argument that these tables are making to me. Because it looks like there is a massive deficit. There's a fiscal deficit on every single household, even individuals with some college, even on the non-immigrant side. there's still almost a $6,000 deficit. So that's just poor people fucking everything up. I don't see why this is centered on immigration then.
Well, obviously, again, assuming the comparison I do that I think is valid and you think is probably crap, but if that's true, then it is obviously relevant to the question of the net economic impact. But sure, like I said, the reason why they consume more welfare and pay less in taxes is because they're poor. Like now, of course, immigrants are not sort of independent of the welfare system, right? So in two respects. Firstly, because their children vote disproportionately for political parties that enhance the welfare state, and then in the second place, because the more poor people that are around, the more that, I mean, it depends on the population. There are some populations anyway, which that's going to evoke more. Like it's going to seem like more problem poor people, and thereby they'll want to support more immigrant welfare. Sure. That does depend on the characteristics of the population.
So I'm not comfortable. I'm not comfortable agreeing or disagreeing with anything here, just because I haven't dug into any of these, because I didn't come across this, or it wasn't reported anywhere in the research that I did. But Cato posted a response to this study. Now, if they're lying in their response, then that's horrible. But when I read some things in here, for instance, heritage counts household use of government benefits, not individual immigrant use. Many unauthorized immigrants are married to U.S. citizens and have U.S. citizen children who live in the same households. Counting the fiscal cost of those native-born U.S. citizens massively overstates the fiscal cost of immigration. It would also count the fiscal cost of their spouses as well, which would be natives. That's not really a fair way to count that fiscal cost.
But isn't that, maybe I misheard, but isn't that dealing with the unlawful immigrants? Wasn't that the...
The thing here is it says that heritage counts household use of government benefits, not individual immigrant use. That the individual use of welfare, and I'm reading these tables that you linked me, it's always household, it's not individuals. So for instance, if I look at the lawful immigrant household, and it says households headed by persons without a high school degree, even though it's showing the fiscal deficit here of that household, that deficit could include a native-born person that married an immigrant.
Sure, that's true. It's looking at the head of household, so
sure.
There's some...
Well, so that, in a way, that's overstating the fiscal deficit caused by immigrants.
I mean, it could be, but it also could not. That would just depend.
Sure, I guess we can propose.
But also, I mean, it's worth noting that when I do when I'm comparing the impact on like the total economy, I'm also like dividing by households, not individuals, so that in both cases we're counting things the same way.
Yeah, I guess, but we're starting to lump in a whole lot of shit that like would make me wonder. For instance, so let's say that like 100 immigrants come over and they consume $1 million in welfare, but then they get married to other people who are natives who also consume $1 million in welfare. Well, now you've shown that 100 people immigrating are consuming $2 million in welfare if you look at their households. So now you've doubled the fiscal drain of this group of people. And now if you want to compare that to their economic impact, I mean, I'm still not sure if it's fair to compare them to the economic impact there, because say they've got spouses that either aren't working or would have been in the lower economic impact in the non-immigrant group. You're actually helping the non-immigrant group there and hurting the immigrant group even more, right? Because if you're really poor and you're an immigrant, this is a hypothesis, I could be wrong, but I'm guessing if you're a poor immigrant, you're probably more likely to marry a poor native. Well, now you've taken that poor native away from the non-immigrant household category, and now you've put them in the immigrant household category. So their fiscal impact is up, their earning is down. You've removed that from the non-immigrant group. Now it seems like you're hardcore skewing your data in one direction. Do you agree or disagree with that?
We would need, I mean, I intuitively be from the same ethnic group as them. I don't think.
Sure. But what I'm saying is that if a poor immigrant comes over, they're probably more likely to marry a poor native. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I would agree with that.
So you've taken a poor native away from your non-immigrant household group. So these poor natives...
well, it depends on if they're well, this has to do with like who's the head of household.
Sure.
Right?
But what I'm saying is that poor native is not going to be included...
But you could do the exact same thing, right? So say that a poor native marries a poor immigrant, but the native is the head of household. Well, then suddenly, like the exact same thing happen, but in reverse.
Non-immigrant households. Oh, because you're saying that these are head of households. Oh, sure. Okay, yeah, I understand. Oof. You just have to make sure that the majority of household heads, it would have to be equal on both sides, which is something else that we would have to look at. Because, for instance, if more people immigrate than tend to be head of households, like if more men immigrate than women, for instance, I'm pretty sure men probably file head of household more than women.
That is probably true.
Well, actually, wait, I'm not actually sure if they look at head of households here. It just says households headed by person without a high school degree. And then it says lawful immigrant households. I don't think it states explicitly that the head of household is an immigrant. Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's saying that the head of the household has to be the one who's the immigrant or not. It's just counting households with immigrants in them.
Well, no, because so if you look at the table 6, like the section of lawful immigrant households, right, and it says that at the very top, but then right under that, with lawful immigrant heads. And then so that's the column where you have the negative 4,000 number.
Oh, man, I don't know. I would have to dig through this because Cato has a lot of critiques for this particular study. Cato tends to slant in a libertarian direction, though, which is going to be pro-immigration. Heritage tends to slant in a conservative direction, which is going to be anti-immigration. So both of these things have their biases. So I'm not really comfortable just saying that the Cato one totally debunks your study, but I would have to dig into that one more. Even at my conclusion here, though, I'm still not comfortable going to a completely different study and then just subtracting this immigrant surplus, because I don't know how this is calculated. Oh, man, dude, this would be so much easier if you just had an economist that was comparing these things and then making this argument in some type of study. Like, it would make this so much easier. Yeah, I don't know. That's all I've got for now. I feel like it would...
I'm not sure what to say to that. Like, the comparison, I mean, we just go in a circle. Like, the comparison, I think, makes sense, but...
Sure. Yeah, well, I mean, like, I guess, like, maybe find an economist that makes the same argument, that calculates all of the numbers and makes sure that everything is being controlled across all categories, that the calculations are fair, and that the like things are being compared. Yeah, I don't know, because this Cato study is, like, incredibly, or this Cato critique is, like, claims that the other study is fatally flawed because of how much it slants in certain directions and what it accounts for and what it doesn't account for. And if it's arguing about those numbers in just that study, taking all of those numbers, assuming they're gospel, and then comparing it to a totally different thing that's not intended to be used that way, I don't know. It's just, I mean, like, if you don't understand my discomfort there, I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I would say so. Two things. One, the degree to which, like, it's a net negative, assuming the comparison is valid, is sufficiently large such that it allows for a fair degree of error in the estimation of the net fiscal impact.
Well, but the problem is, like, for instance, because of what the Heritage Foundation is, the way that they calculate the fiscal gains by, for instance, Cato says that they don't measure any indirect fiscal effects or anything at all, right? So the way that the Heritage Foundation calculates these fiscal gains might be downplaying hardcore on the side of the immigrant. I don't know if that's true or not, because I would have to dig into this more. It might be downplaying it hardcore. And then this other study that you linked, the way that they calculate it might be different specific to this study. I'm not sure what that... Hold on, I have to click again. I don't even know what the purpose of that study is. I mean, like, you're laughing, but these, like, real, like... if you've ever taken a college course, like, a professor would, like, laugh at you and then flunk your paper if you were to make a comparison between two numbers like this. So they would tell you that you need to go back and you need to calculate all of these numbers yourself to make sure that these are like comparisons being done. You can't just take two... like, this isn't how a meta-analysis is done. This isn't how, like, careful data is studied. Like, nobody does it like this. You'll never in your life see a paper published where somebody's like, we took the number from this and compared it to that, and this is our conclusion, right? They very, very carefully and meticulously go back and make sure that the same numbers are being collected and compared. Like, this is just a totally bad way to compare two things.
Obviously they're not calculated the same way, right? Because they're just different numbers. They're measuring different
Yeah,
things.
but what I'm saying is they might account for different things for different reasons. Like maybe the fiscal impact of one doesn't include a bunch of indirect effects because it's not relevant to their study. But then in the other one where it's talking about overall economic gain or loss, maybe those things should be accounted for. Like, you're comparing two studies that are measuring totally different things, and then you're ripping two numbers from both of them and comparing them. Like, this is a totally horrible way to do data analysis. Like, nobody does this ever.
They're measuring different things, right? I mean, I think that's fine. They should account. They should count things differently because they are measuring different things, and then those two things are related to each other. Like, the comparison. Like, of course, they're going to calculate the numbers differently because they're literally just calculating different numbers.
Yeah, but I'm it would be like me saying, like, I want to study how, I can't even think of a comparable situation that would be, like, as absurdly complicated as this. Do you have any friends that like study economics that you want to bring on and maybe they can trash me? I would be really curious to hear like somebody with a background in econ defend this type of data comparison. Like, just because, again, like when I'm doing all my research on stream, like I have multiple PhD economists in my chat, and when I try to do something like this, like they roast the fuck out of me for doing it because it's so grossly irresponsible and so stupid to do, and it never gets you the right answer, and then they'll bring up a million reasons why it's not a valid comparison. Like if you have somebody, or if you want to bring somebody back for like a round two or something that has a background in economics, I would be really curious to hear somebody defend this sort of analysis, because I'm very confident that nobody will. Like it's just a really dumb way to compare data.
I mean, yeah, I don't think it's dumb. I can, if I run into someone, I guess I can send you a message.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it. I would be very interested to see that. Yeah. All right. You got anything else, buddy?
Well, looking at the thing you linked about. What is this? The Fuentes debate.
Yeah.
Just maybe a quick thing. I was looking at the sixth thing because that was the immigrant thing, and then under it there was the social cohesion argument.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like you're making a comparison between. I was just skimming it, obviously, because I was talking to you, but it seems like putting a mix between early European immigrants and non-European immigrants today, and assuming that because the social cohesion effects were not long-lasting, that will also play out with non-European immigrants.
Okay. Wait, what are you saying? That your mic cuts out a little bit again, so I'm trying to piece together if I miss words.
Oh, crap. That in the with the social cohesion stuff, right, where there's this paper by Putnam, and the ethnic diversity is negatively correlated to social cohesion. Putnam says something to the effect in the paper of, well, things will probably be fine because European immigrants came in the early 20th century and there were problems, and that smoothed out. Okay. And it seems like that's what, again, just skimming it, it seems like that's what you were saying in your notes.
Oh, yeah, that was the argument that I was making, sure.
Okay, and I don't think that it is... I think we should be cautious about assuming that European immigration and assimilation is going to work out the same way with non-European immigrants.
Why is that?
It's for, I guess, a couple reasons. So, like, one reason is that the more... So I guess there are two sorts of reasons. Firstly, America has lots of non-white groups that have been around for a very long time, and it hasn't played out that way. Like, a lot of the ethnic diversity in Putnam's study is driven by African Americans, an ethnic group that's been here since virtually the beginning. Okay. And then in the second place, these groups are much more observably different, and that makes it harder to overcome people's innate tendency towards tribalism.
Sure, it's difficult.
Find themselves in ways that cause social conflict.
Sure. I'm not saying it's going to be just as easy or whatnot as it was before. I mean, obviously we still have difficulties, but I guess I was just curious because it seemed like Fuentes was making the argument that people of different ethnic backgrounds will never come together for whatever reason, but it seems like we have done that in the past in the United States, so I don't see why we can't continue to do that. I mean, when I'm debating somebody called Nicholas Fuentes, who's trying to make an argument for a white ethno-state, that seems to me that he's pretty well integrated into the whiteness concept. Like, his last name is more Hispanic than mine is, and I'm more Hispanic than he is. Like,
sure. I mean, for one thing, Spaniards are white, but
okay, yeah.
I mean, this is like the Iberian Peninsula in Europe. So
no, I know, but you're making the SJW argument now, where you're trying to show me how whites have included all these other groups of people that 250 years ago wouldn't have been included as white. But you're making the SJW argument now.
I mean, I'm not saying anything about 250 years ago.
Okay, sure. Well, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, that like today Hispanic people, because of their origins or whatever, because we've kind of opened up, how many people can be included under the white category. It seems like, yeah. Oh no,
I'm not saying that all Hispanic people. So I guess maybe I see what you're saying now. I was just saying that I don't know about Fuentes in particular, but if it's the case that just comes from, like, literally from Spain, then that is that's just European. Now, as this, Hispanic people are very significantly Amerindian, in which case, obviously, that's not European.
Gotcha. So it's just, so which people do you think can't integrate?
I think that the further they are from Europeans, the more difficult if you want to be really particular in the United States, the further they are from Northwestern Europeans, we could say that as well. But since we're not talking about that, the further they are from white people, basically, the more difficult it's going to be.
So, like on your diagram, do Asian people fit closer to white people than Africans, or?
They are closer, yeah, although they obviously don't fully assimilate either.
You don't think they're... Have you ever been to a place like Seattle or Los Angeles before? You don't think... maybe this is an anecdote shit, but I feel like there are Asian people that are pretty highly integrated into, white America.
Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by assimilation, right? Because they don't... their socioeconomic status does not look like that of whites. It's above that. Same with their educational attainment. They don't vote the way whites do.
Well, sure, because we're selecting for specific groups of people from countries like China or South Korea, right? We're typically the wealthier people and the smarter people are the ones that can immigrate, right? You're not getting poor, dumb people from China immigrating to the United States. It's usually wealthier people that can afford the trip.
That's part of it. It's also has to do with the psychological and cultural characteristics of the Asians themselves, even in Asia.
Sure.
But the point is, Asian people have not assimilated. Asian people are clearly they're distinct from white people in America. They have an identity that's distinct from white people. They aren't politically the same. They're just not. No,
I feel like they're fairly well integrated, I guess, depending. I'm sure that they have voting patterns just culturally. I'm sure that there's still some separation there. If you're Asian in the U.S., you probably don't have a family in the U.S. going back generations and generations and generations like white people do. So I'm sure there are going to be differences there. But I'm trying to get to the meat of your argument. So why don't you think that African people, for instance, could ever integrate into U.S. culture? Or do you think that an African American from the United States has more in common with somebody from, say, Kenya than they would from somebody in, say, California?
That would depend on what metric we use.
What metric would you use?
See, genetically, they're more similar to the Kenyan. Linguistically, they're more similar to the Californian. They just did. But African Americans, for reasons, for psychological reasons, racial reasons, they do not assimilate into white culture either.
Would you say that? So somebody like Obama, does that seem like somebody that would be fighting in the Black Panther, the warrior African, or does he seem more like a well-adjusted, middle class white person?
Okay. So firstly, obviously, he's not representative of black people in general, but then in the second place, Barack Obama is not he's literally he's a left-wing politician, so obviously he's not middle-class white Americans.
Okay. You don't think any middle-class white Americans are liberal, or?
It's not that none are, but that's not the average. That's not how we would conceptualize them generally. Right? Middle-class, upper-class black people do tend to be, because they tend to look at politics through a partially racial lens that biases them towards the left.
Okay. But you're not... White people don't do that, though. That might bias them towards the right?
Don't do that to the extent that black people do. Some white people do that, but it's not to the same extent.
I don't do subtle.
Okay. All right. Well, fuck. I gotta hop into a thing, because I told a friend I would party with him. Do you have any final closing thoughts, buddy?
No, not really. So, thanks for having me on.
All right. Well, hey, I love you, buddy. If you find an econ friend or whatever that wants to come on and argue your points, I'd be interested to hear it, all right?
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.
That was a League of Legends time?
Yeah, fuck. That lasted too long than I thought it would.
Two questions.
Yeah, what's up?
You told me to kill you at the beginning of that argument. Should I have killed you? Was that worth it?
If you kill me, Kyle, that's a hate crime, okay? My Hispanic genes are not fully integrated into white America, all right? So I think you killing me...
Do you think that guy was a racist?
He started off wanting to cite the alternate hypothesis. I'm surprised he didn't bring up the fucking warrior gene. All right, well, we tried.
That was questionable.